Hi all. So today we're going to discuss um, Boddy's work on spirits and selves in northern Sudan, the cultural therapeutics of possession and trance. So it's been a while I haven't read this work again, and I think it's a good one. So we're continuing with the theme of spirit possessions. And we're looking at it from a different perspective, right? Ellison is saying in her reflection paper, yeah, like spirit possession normally is thought as a demonic endeavor, but we are looking at it, for example, in Buban's work, it was um, spirit possession was a political event where people were asking political advice to ancestors. And in this one, Bodhi is telling us that we can actually look spirit possessions not as not just an evil endeavor, and even people are thinking of spirit possessions as sickness, illness, but she says actually when you look at it through how selves and personhood are played in the moment of trance, we can have a different perspective and we can see that these moments of possessions actually are therapeutic moments where people heal, where women have a potential to heal, she says. And some of you mentioned that actually it was a kind of tough to see what women are going through in northern Sudan, because the author, she is relating her main argument to the way women are perceived in northern Sudan, yeah, or to the way that gender identity is played out. And she is specifically talking about genital circumcision that women need to go through at a very early age. So I kind of agree with the reflection papers that these kind of issues um, generate strong sentiments in us, and that's normal because I mean it's obviously a male dominated world where women do not have much to say, but um, I think the way to look at these um, systems of inequalities in non-Western contexts should be to acknowledge the system of inequality, like gender, race, nationality, ethnicity, can be those, but also it's important not to look at them from a position of superiority, yeah? Oh, those people, those poor women, those victimized women who just are trapped in this patriarchal system and they do not have an agency, they do not have anything to say, because when you get to that story, you're kind of working on your imagination and working these, like thinking about these women as powerless victims of the patriarchy. Yeah, we talked about this when we were discussing Korkman's article on whaling. Yeah, but on the other hand, I think it's important to acknowledge that yes, this is a system of inequality. It's gender inequality, and the way that it is playing out in northern Sudan is this: genital circumcision is part of it, and I'm gonna just begin talking about what Bodhi's telling about gender inequality in northern Sudan. But also bear in mind that in the United States also gender inequality is a big part of our lives. Yeah. So when looking at other cultures, one thing not to do is to say, oh, you're coming from a superior position. Actually, that's debatable, I would say. Um, so in order to argue that separate possession kind of poses a moment of therapeutic release for these women, she sets the gender inequality in a specific way. Yeah, she's saying that uh, marriage, for example, for these women happens through kin relationships. Yeah, so it's a very it's a society where it's dominated by family, and people are not marrying because of love relationships, but in order to enhance the family. For example, your match would be found in accordance to your economic socioeconomic position. Yeah, so individual in that sense is not important, or individual emotions are not important, Boddy is saying us, but the society is about the continuance of family. And she's going into details like how women are associated with certain kinds of birds, and how it is better to be associated with a kind of purer bird. And I think she's she's referring that women are associated with the nature, whereas men are associated with culture. Yeah, women are associated with the bodily sphere, whereas men are the ones who are associated with the outside sphere, who are supposed to kind of um feed the family. Yeah, but women are responsible from reproduction. Yeah, and she was saying that there are three different realms that plays out in this society, which are the soul, the breath, ruh, and nefis. Nefis is short term for nefis in Western culture with desire, like the animal life force, and ak, its reason. Yeah. So since people consider women to be more close to nefis, the animal life force, the desire, and they do not want this, and they want women to use their sexuality just in terms of fertility but not pleasure, so they make women go through this genital circumcision. Yeah, and he's she's arguing that these moments are where women understand that their identity belongs to the identity of the social and cultural. Yeah, she's saying that actually woman's personality or woman's personhood is culturally overdetermined, and she relates this overdetermination to this moment of genital circumcision. Yeah, and not just your own circumcision, but women actually participate to other women's circumcisions. So as a way to remind for women that what is important for them is fertility, not sexual pleasure. Um, and she's saying, Boddy is saying that the possession, the czar possession, the spirit possession, happens only to the women who are married and who are having problems to have kids. Yeah, and if you have problems to have kids, firstly, the woman is considered responsible, and they can suffer a co-wifery, like the husband can marry another woman, and or you can end up getting divorced. And all these kind of affect women's social power in the society. And women who cannot perform, like who cannot have give birth to children, they become depressed and they kind of suffer from this as a consequence. Yeah. And those are the women who gets to have or possessed by these spirits, which are called Zairan, jinns. Yeah, so let's go to page 8, where she defines the kind of entities. Sorry, so it is on page 10, but on page 8 of the PDF. So it's under the title Zairan and Zar Possession. Zairan belong to a class of beings known as jinn, whose existence is substantiated in several verses of the Quran. So it's an Islamic practice or Islamic belief. According to Hofriati, jinn are the physical complementaries of humans in a holistic, quadripartite creation where humans are composed of earth and water. Jinn are made of fire and wind or air. And they are three categories of jinns. Yeah, one is white. They are more they are less dangerous. There is black jinns. They can do real harm to the people who they possess. And there is the red jinn who they kind of seek pleasure. I mean, in my uh, cultural background, people believe that jinns exist, for example, but they belong to another kind of parallel universe where they do not materialize. But jinns kind of want to come and taste this material world through humans. Yeah, for example, when I was a child, we were told not to summon spirits or not to summon jinns because we would risk jinns staying with us and kind of destroying, or not destroying, but disrupting the usual um, life occurrences. And Boddy is saying this can be a lifelong possession too. So they just want to, the jinns want to have access to the world through human beings. On the page 11, at the end of the page, she says, one thing that the hedonistic czar hopes to gain by possessing a human being is a venue for access to the human world in ceremonial contexts where it can frolic and be entertained. Thus, when a spirit is ritually summoned by its chant, it simultaneously infiltrates each of its entranced hosts so as to interact with the human assembly through their bodies. Yeah. But this is like a negotiation, she says. Yeah, because as the trance happens, Jinn kind of finds a place to kind of experience this material world, but Jinn also cannot take the whole power of the individual that is possessed. Uh, and she is making the argument here that even if they are linked to sickness, actually, in this moments of trances, women feel different and they feel better, she says. Uh, But also, when she does this argument, she's saying that I am kind of. Mm, she says that it's hard for her to make this kind of argument because she's translating what women experience into Western language and culture. So, women who go through these trances, they do not um, put or think of these trances as therapeutical movements, yeah, but also they do not have the same terms as the author is using to understand these moments of trances, such as like personhood, self, or psychology. um, but she's saying I'm doing this in order to get a detailed understanding of this possession. I mean, she's kind of saying that I'm doing the best I can, but this is more sophisticated. The whole story is much more complex than the story I'm reducing it to. Yeah. Um, yeah, she's saying at the end of the page 12. Here I will begin to pull together the threads of my argument, indicating how possession is linked to what I consider is Hofriati woman's problematic selfhood. But on this issue especially, I walk the ethnographer's unsteady line between keeping faith with informants' experience of their world and rendering that experience intelligible in the more familiar parlance of Western culture. Um, And when this possession happens, she's saying, actually, women go through, they do not go directly to Sheikha, to the female leader of Zar trances, but women actually go to seek help in medicine. They go to the fakie, that's who's like a male spiritual Islamic religious healer, and then they go to the czar, female leader. And once that this leader, the shaika, tells that the woman is possessed, she's saying that there is the moment of recognition and there is the moment of the therapeutical effect beginning, kind of. And she's saying that, and this is where she kind of relates her argument back to the genital circumcision. She says, since the woman is possessed by different spirits, and these different spirits are, she's saying in, let me see. So she's saying there are spirits from many different nationalities, there are spirits from many like different genders, different socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's kind of a really parallel universe in which spirits are thought kind of uh, having human identities, yeah. And the argument that she is making, it's a very interesting argument, I think. So in these moments of trance, since the woman is possessed by different spirits, the woman loses her self, which is overdetermined by cultural gender roles. Yeah. So in a way, she says that the woman in that moment of trance become selfless, and through being possessed by different spirits from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, she is able to see that there are different experiences in the world. Yeah, so she is able to have a different kind of perspective to her gendered self, personhood. And this is a relief for her kind of depression that is derived from fertility, yeah? So the woman who feels like she cannot perform her quote unquote reason of existence, which is fertility, when she sees other perspective, she comes to the conclusion that it's actually like the world is not just about her identity or her own self-definition, which is culturally defined. Whereas, interestingly, a very interesting part of her argument, I would say, that she says she kind of compares these trends to moments to the Western psychotherapy, yeah, or neurosis. So she's saying neurosis is caused by losing yourself in Western culture. Yeah, you losing your perception and self-identity. And what the psychotherapy does is kind of bring back together, integrate what you have lost outside. Like she's saying, she's using these terms to like make her case better in a way, like the neurotic patient loses the integrated self to the outside, and the psychotherapy integrates back the self through talking. And I think this is kind of a bold argument to make. I would like to hear your opinions in this compare and contrast. And she's saying because, and I think the implication of this argument that um, the Tsar woman's self-perception is culturally determined, whereas the Western person's perception is not. And I would say, is it true? Like, I understand her case of woman going through a traumatic experience in genital circumcision, but I'm not very convinced that like how my identity is not culturally overdetermined in a way. I think in her argument she's taking individual and society in two oppositions, saying like Western culture is more individual and Sudan's culture is less individualistic, and I'm not sure about that part of her argument. So on page 15, she's talking about different kinds of spirits. She says, the second paragraph after discussion spirits and female selves, the subtitle discussion spirits and female selves. Zairan inhabit a world parallel to our own and contiguous with it, yet imperceptible to humans except under certain conditions. Like us, they are divided into ethnic groups, families, occupations, religions, and she goes on to say like among their numbers are the spirit analogues of Muslim saints, Turkish administrator, Europeans, blah 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 blah. So the spirits actually are, as I said, coming from different backgrounds. There was a part that I wanted to read. yeah, this is the part that she's making an analogy with the Western psychotherapy. So on page 18, towards the middle of the second paragraph, this in turn leads to an individualistic orientation to illness, which, because it rarely addresses okay, so I'm taking it from one sentence before. We tacitly dismiss siren as facts of reality existence and mistakenly employ a highly individualistic and compartmentalized concept of the self, which has no basis in village culture. This in turn leads to an individualistic orientation to illness, which, because it rarely addresses social context, misses the point of most illness in Hofriat, including possession. Yeah, so she's saying actually this possession is not due to an individual malfunctioning in the body, but it is due to a person's self perception and kind of concluded that that person concluded that she's lacking something, she's lacking fertility in order to comply with society's rules. Moreover, even the assumption that spirits represent projections of intolerable feelings is, as Krapanzana notes, a debatable one. Spirits, like the illnesses they cause, originate outside of the human self, not within it. Unlike Western psychotherapy, which encourages the patient to accept and integrate previously dissociated feelings as part of herself, Zar therapy works by convincing her to recognize them as separated from herself in the first place. So she's saying, and I think I agree with this part of the argument. She's saying that the Zar possession originates outside the human self. Yeah, it is originated because of a social cause, and the Western patient actually is got sick because of something internal that has dissociated, and the therapy kind of integrates that dissociated feelings, whereas in Zar possession the therapeutic effect comes from the fact that woman is able to see that there are different perspectives and there are different selves that's outside of her. I don't know, I'm just, I think I'm a bit like confused about her comparison to Western psychotherapy. And I feel like she's using these terms outside, inside, a bit too in opposition to one another. I don't know if this is helping to further eliminate, but I want to hear your take on this article. But at any rate, I think it's an interesting, or like it's a brilliant argument to think of these possessions through therapeutic terms. Yeah.